Let's talk about silent shadows, and how they shape the world we live in. Sandra sat on the edge of her bed, her fingers absently tracing the rim of her pill bottle. It was a familiar ritual, one that had become second nature over the years. The soft light filtering through the curtains cast a warm glow on her cluttered room, the remnants of a life balanced precariously between hope and fear. She had worked diligently to keep her viral load undetectable, a feat that required unwavering dedication and discipline. Yet now, as she stared at the bottle, she felt an unsettling weight settle in her chest. For the past few years, the stigma of being HIV positive had loomed over her relationships like a dark cloud. Each time she navigated the murky waters of intimacy, she faced a dilemma: to disclose her status or to remain silent. The memories of past encounters flooded her mind. The looks of horror, the sudden distance, the whispered judgments. Sandra had learned the hard way that not everyone was educated about HIV, and to some, it was a deal breaker. Tonight, she had a date. A casual meetup with a man she had been speaking to online, someone who seemed genuinely interested in her. They had exchanged flirtatious messages, shared laughter, and bonded over their love for music. But deep down, Sandra knew that the moment would come when she would have to make a choice. Would she tell him the truth? As the minutes ticked by, she felt her heart race. She slipped into a form-fitting black dress, one that hugged her curves and made her feel confident. She applied a touch of makeup, carefully concealing the shadows under her eyes. She wanted to look her best, to feel her best. But with each stroke of mascara, doubt crept in. What if she told him? Would he run away, just like the others? The thought made her stomach churn. It felt unfair that her status could overshadow the person she was: an artist, a friend, a lover. She longed for intimacy without the weight of her diagnosis looming over her. As she arrived at the trendy bar downtown, the ambiance buzzed with energy. She spotted him right away, tall, with an easy smile and deep, expressive eyes. They greeted each other with a warm hug, and for a moment, the world outside faded away. They chatted, laughed, and shared stories about their lives. The chemistry between them was undeniable, and Sandra felt a thrill she hadn't felt in a long time. As the night progressed, the topic of relationships came up. Sandra listened intently as he spoke about his past, his fears, and his dreams. He seemed open-minded, but she knew better than to jump to conclusions. After a few drinks, the conversation took a more intimate turn. They leaned closer, their hands brushing against each other, igniting a spark that made her pulse quicken. And then, the moment of truth arrived. She could feel the tension in the air, an electric anticipation. He leaned in, his breath warm against her cheek. "Can I kiss you?" he whispered, and Sandra's heart raced. This was it. She could either reveal her status and risk everything or succumb to the temptation of the moment. In her mind, the arguments played out like a tug of war. This was her body, her choice. She had worked hard to achieve an undetectable viral load. There was no risk of transmission, yet the fear of societal judgment loomed large. She took a deep breath and nodded, allowing him to close the distance between them. The kiss was intoxicating, soft, sweet, and filled with promise. As they pulled away, her mind raced. She was caught in a whirlwind of desire and dread. They exchanged knowing smiles, and before she could think twice, they were headed back to his place. Inside his apartment, the atmosphere shifted. The walls were adorned with artwork that spoke to his creative side, and the dim lighting created an intimate setting. They kissed again, and this time it deepened, igniting a fire within her. All the worries and fears seemed to melt away as they stumbled onto the couch, lost in each other's embrace. But as their hands began to wander, a pang of guilt washed over her. She paused, pulling back slightly. "I should probably tell you something," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. His expression shifted, and she could see the curiosity in his eyes. "What is it?" The words caught in her throat. She felt vulnerable, exposed, and terrified of his reaction. Her mind raced through the scenarios. Would he understand? Would he run? She swallowed hard, grappling with the decision. I'm HIV positive," she finally managed, the confession hanging in the air like a heavy fog. She watched as his smile faltered, and his brow furrowed in confusion. "Are you serious?" he replied, his voice laced with disbelief. "But you said you're undetectable, right?" "Yes, she replied, her heart pounding. That means I can't transmit the virus. I take my meds regularly, and my doctor says I'm healthy. He leaned back, processing her words. I've heard about that, but I still don't understand. Why didn't you tell me sooner? The question hung between them, and Sandra felt the familiar sting of shame. I didn't want to scare you away. I've had bad experiences in the past, people who couldn't handle it. He sighed, running his hands through his hair. Look, I'm not judging you. I just wish you had been honest from the start. It's a lot to take in. The tension in the room thickened, and Sandra felt a sense of defeat wash over her. She could see the wheels turning in his mind, and she knew the conversation was shifting. He was grappling with the weight of her revelation, and she could feel the distance growing between them. I just want to be with you, she said softly, desperately trying to bridge the gap. I'm not a danger to anyone. I just want to live and love like anyone else. I get that, he replied, his tone softening. But it's hard to process. I need some time to think. Sandra's heart sank as he stood up, moving to the other side of the room. The warmth of their earlier connection felt like a distant memory, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. She watched as he paced, his mind clearly racing. After what felt like an eternity, he turned to her, his expression conflicted. I'm sorry, Sandra, I need to figure this out. I didn't expect this. It's a lot. With that, he walked to the door, leaving Sandra alone in the dimly lit apartment. The weight of her choices pressed down on her, and she felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She had tried to protect herself, to shield her heart, and yet here she was, more exposed than ever. In the days that followed, Sandra felt like a ghost haunting her own life. She replayed the encounter over and over in her mind, grappling with the consequences of her choice. She had hoped for acceptance, for understanding, but instead, she had been met with hesitation. She poured herself into her art, using it as a form of therapy. The canvas became a refuge, a place where she could express the turmoil brewing inside her. Each brushstroke was a release, a way to channel her emotions into something beautiful. But no matter how much she painted, the ache of rejection remained. Weeks passed, and she found herself drifting through life in a haze. The vibrant colors of her art felt muted, and the world outside her window seemed dull and lifeless. She missed the connection she had felt with him, the warmth of his laughter, the spark that had ignited between them. But every time she thought of reaching out, the fear of rejection held her back. One evening, as she stood in her studio, staring at an unfinished canvas, her phone buzzed. A message notification flickered on the screen, and her heart raced as she recognized his name. Hey, can we talk? The words sent a rush of emotions coursing through her. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to respond. But the longing for connection overpowered her fear, and she quickly typed back, yes, I'd like that. They agreed to meet at a nearby cafe, and as she arrived, her heart pounded in her chest. She spotted him sitting at a corner table, his expression serious but open. As she approached, she felt a mix of anticipation and dread. Hey, she said softly as she sat down. Hey, he replied, his voice steady. I've been thinking a lot about what you told me. Sandra held her breath, bracing herself for what was to come. And I didn't realize how much stigma there is around HIV, he said, his gaze sincere. I did some research, talked to a friend who works in healthcare. I want to understand more, and I want to give us a chance. Relief washed over her, and she felt a spark of hope. Really, you mean it? Yeah, I think it's important to be honest with each other. I don't want to lose what we have because of fear or misunderstanding. Tears of gratitude filled her eyes as she smiled, overwhelmed by his willingness to learn and grow. They spent hours talking, sharing their fears, their dreams, and their vulnerabilities. As the conversation flowed, Sandra felt the weight of her past begin to lift. Over the following weeks, they navigated their relationship with newfound understanding. They attended support groups together, educating themselves about HIV and the realities of living with it. He met her friends, who embraced him with open arms, and together they explored the beauty of intimacy, always communicating, always honest. As time passed, Sandra realized that love could exist without the shadows of fear. She learned to trust again, not just in him but also in herself. She was more than her diagnosis. She was a vibrant, complex person deserving of love and connection. And as they stood together, hand in hand, looking out at the world, Sandra felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had faced her fears, embraced her truth, and discovered the power of vulnerability. In a world that often tried to silence her, she had found her voice, a voice that echoed with resilience, hope, and love. And in that moment, she knew that she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, not just as a survivor, but as a woman unapologetically alive. This story is a fictional narrative inspired by real-life experiences. It aims to shed light on the complexities of living with HIV, the importance of communication in relationships, and the journey towards acceptance and understanding. 10 Down WJ, where creativity meets impact. 10 Down WJ, ENT